My 7-year-old got suspended for the best reason ever. The principal called me at work on a Friday. There's been a major incident with Bennett and Mrs. Bridges today. Please come in immediately. Of course, it's Ms. Bridges again, I thought. I'd already filed 5 complaints about her, but the principal's voice had that tone administrators use when they're already decided who's at fault. I left my meeting and drove to Jefferson Elementary. When I arrived, Mr. Davidson was outside the main office with his arms crossed. This is completely unacceptable. Bennett verbally assaulted Ms. Bridges during a test. She called her stupid and mean in front of 22 students. My eyes went wide. Bennett has never once talked back to Ms. Bridges. Not when Ms. Bridges removed Bennett's aid during tests. Not when she mocked Bond's anxiety disorder. Not even when she held up Bennett's failed tests to humiliate her to the whole class. Mr. Davidson walked me toward his office, shaking his head. Ms. Bridges left the classroom in tears with how everyone laughed at her. We're looking at a 3-day suspension. I'm also recommending a behavioral evaluation. Inside the office, Ms. Bridges sat in a leather chair, wiping her cheeks with Kleenex tissues. Her makeup was smeared. Across from her, in a chair too big for her small frame, sat my daughter. Her face had that smirk that said, "Hell yeah, I did that." I couldn't help but crack a sly smile. Bennett needs to apologize immediately, Mr. Davidson started, settling behind his desk. Ms. Bridges nodded, still dabbing her cheeks. She's been defiant all year. Today was the last straw. She had another one of her attention-seeking outbursts. Attention-seeking. That's what she called it when Bennett hyperventilated without her aid, when she vomited from anxiety while being forced to sit through tests she couldn't complete. Maybe mainstream education isn't the right fit, the principal added, pulling out forms. We have excellent alternative programs. Bennett, I interrupted, can you please tell me what happened? Ms. Bridges shifted in her chair, a flicker of something crossing her face. I'm telling you what happened. I asked my daughter, not you. Bonbon, will you please tell me what happened? Bennett looked directly at her teacher, then back at me. She removed my aid again, but then she did something else. I urged her to continue. Ms. Bridges wouldn't let Joseph go to the bathroom, Bennett said. She's making things up again. Ms. Bridges started, but I interrupted her again. Don't mind her, Bond. Continue. Joseph was crying. He kept raising his hand. He said, please, Ms. Bridges, I really need to go. But she told him, you're not special. Finish your test first. You should have gone before we started. Mr. Davidson's eyebrows furrowed. He turned slightly toward Ms. Bridges. He has a thing where he can't go long without using the bathroom. Ms. Bridges knew this. Joseph had an accident, Bennett said, her voice steady. In his chair. Pee went everywhere. On the floor, on his shoes, down his legs. The room went quiet. Ms. Bridges' face had gone from indignant to defensive. Children need to learn boundaries. She made him sit in it, Bennett said. For the whole test, 20 more minutes. She said, look class, this is what happens when we don't follow rules. She said, this is what Joseph chose to do instead of holding it like a big boy. Mr. Davidson's jaw had tightened. Ms. Bridges? The child is exaggerating. She called him a baby, Bennett continued. Said maybe he needs diapers. Joseph was crying so hard he couldn't breathe. His legs were all red and burning. The smell was everywhere. Kids were gagging. Ms. Bridges' face was flushed with embarrassment. She had no words. Is that when you called her stupid bonbon? I asked her. Number. Because when Joseph's test paper got ruined because of his tears, Ms. Bridges loudly said there are now 2 babies in the classroom. Me and Joseph. I was staring daggers through Ms. Bridges. So I stood up and said, you're stupid, you're mean, you're a bully. And I helped Joseph. Walked him to the bathroom. The other kids started telling Ms. Bridges that was mean. Then she ran out crying. Mr. Davidson was flush white. He turned to the teacher. Is this true? She stayed silent. Oh, you're pleading the fifth, huh? He retorted at her. He started pulling up his laptop. Good thing we have cameras in all classrooms for safety. Ms. Bridges went white. That's not necessary. I think it is, he said coldly, turning the screen so we could all see. He fast-forwarded to the incident. There was Joseph, clearly in distress. Mr. Bridges pointed at him to put his hand down. We watched the accident, her making him sit in it, gestured to the class to look at him, even pointing at laughing at him. Mr. Davidson closed the laptop slowly. Ms. Bridges, my office, tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. She was so shaken she was tearing up again by this point. Go home, now. She gathered her things with shaking hands, unable to look at anyone as she left. Mr. Davidson turned to me. I'm removing the suspension immediately. I apologize. That Monday, our special needs assistant took over as substitute teacher. Bennett left for school ecstatic, but when I went to pick her up later, the substitute teacher pulled me aside. I heard Ms. Bridges is being reinstated this week. Earlier today, I found something in her drawer. I think she forgot to clear it out. Look, I took one clear look and instantly realized I had to rush inside myself. The substitute teacher was holding a thick manila folder stuffed with papers, and my stomach dropped when I saw red ink scrawled across the top page. She pulled out sheet after sheet, showing accommodation plans for different kids in the class with the word ignore written in angry red letters across each one. My hands started shaking as I recognized Bennett's plan, with her anxiety accommodations crossed out, and Joseph's medical needs form with a big X through the bathroom section. There was even a printed email from the district about testing protocols with Ms. Bridges' handwriting in the margins saying, no exceptions, no bathroom breaks during tests, underlined 3 times. The substitute teacher whispered that she found it shoved in the back of the bottom drawer, like Ms. Bridges forgot to take it when she left Friday. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of every single page, while my hands trembled so bad I had to retake some shots twice to get them clear. The substitute teacher grabbed the stack and rushed to the classroom printer and started making copies while watching the door, like we were doing something illegal, even though we weren't the ones breaking federal education laws. She handed me the copies and kept the originals, and we both knew this was bigger than just Bennett or Joseph, because there were 7 other kids' plans in that folder all marked up the same way. I stuffed the copies in my bag and practically ran down the hall to Mr. Davidson's office, but his secretary stopped me at the door saying he was in an important meeting with district officials about budget stuff and wouldn't be free until after 4. I told her it was urgent about Mrs. Bridges and showed her 1 page, but she just shook her head and said she'd leave him a message marked urgent, but that was the best she could do. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, just staring at the copies and getting madder with each page I read through. That evening after Bennett went to bed, I sat at my computer and typed up the most detailed email I'd ever written to the district compliance officer, whose contact info I found on the school website. I attached all 17 photos I'd taken and explained how this showed Ms. Bridges had been deliberately ignoring legally required accommodations for multiple students with documented disabilities and medical needs for who knows how long. I hit send at 11:30 after reading it through 5 times to make sure I had everything documented correctly. Tuesday morning, my phone rang at 7, and it was Joseph's mother sobbing and thanking me because another parent had told her about what we found Monday, and she'd been beating herself up for months thinking Joseph's accidents were her fault for not potty training him right. We talked for 40 minutes and agreed to to share any information we got from the district and to support each other through whatever came next, because we both knew this was going to get messy. She told me she'd already called a lawyer who specialized in education law and discrimination cases. Wednesday morning, Mr. Davidson called me before work, asking me to come in for an emergency meeting about what he called temporary safety measures for the affected students. He had a whole plan typed up saying Bennett would have her aide present for every single test from now on, plus unlimited hall passes and access to the counselor's office whenever she felt overwhelmed without needing teacher permission. He did the same for Joseph and the other kids whose plans were in that folder, and said these measures would stay in place indefinitely while the investigation happened. The second week after finding the folder, I finally got a meeting with the district compliance officer, who turned out to be this older woman who looked genuinely upset when she saw the photos and copies spread across her desk. She explained the investigation process would take several weeks, maybe even months, because they had to interview every parent and student affected, plus review Ms. Bridges' records going back years to see if this was a pattern. She warned me these cases moved slowly through the system because of union rules and due process requirements, but promised she was taking it seriously and would keep me updated. That same afternoon, I got a call from someone identifying herself as a union representative who started off friendly but quickly turned cold when she warned me about making public statements about Ms. Bridges. The folder with "ignore" written across accommodation plans makes me wonder about Ms. Bridges' real thoughts during all those meetings where she nodded and agreed to support these kids. Was she planning to ignore them the whole time? She said Ms. Bridges had due process rights and suggested I could face legal action for defamation if I kept talking to other parents about what we found, which made me laugh because we had photographic evidence of her own handwriting. She hung up when I asked if she'd seen the evidence. Wednesday of the second week, Bennett came home from the school with her shoulders slumped and wouldn't talk during dinner until finally she told me the lunch aide had made comments about certain kids getting special privileges now and looking right at her when she said it. I documented everything Bennett remembered word for word and added it to the growing file I was keeping because my lawyer friend said to document absolutely everything, no matter how small it seemed. Thursday, we had our first appointment with a child psychologist who specialized in the school anxiety and trauma because Bennett had started having nightmares about going to the school and would throw up some mornings from stress. The therapist spent 90 minutes with Bennett alone, then another 30 with me explaining how the classroom incidents had created real psychological damage that would take months, maybe years, to fully address. The therapist gave me copies of her notes and said she'd testify if needed, which made me feel like we finally had someone professional on our side. That Friday afternoon, I got an email from the district office saying they were restricting all access to the classroom security footage because of student privacy laws. Only authorized investigators could review it now, which meant I couldn't share copies with our lawyer or anyone else who might help us. The email came from the district's legal department and had all kinds of warnings about sharing any footage I might have already obtained. I spent Saturday morning at the public library, filling out a formal public records request for every bathroom policy the school had used in the past 5 years. I also requested logs of all bathroom requests from Ms. Bridges' classroom for the entire school year. The clerk at the district office took my forms and said they had 30 days to respond, which felt like forever when Bennett was still having nightmares every night. Monday evening was the monthly PTA meeting at Jefferson, and I went hoping to find other parents who might have had problems with Ms. Bridges. I sat in the back row listening to budget discussions when I heard two moms in front of me whispering about how Bennett was disruptive and got away with everything. One of them turned around and looked right at me before saying loud enough for everyone to hear that some kids just didn't belong in regular classrooms. My hands were shaking, but I grabbed my purse and walked out before I said something I'd regret. Tuesday morning, my phone rang while I was making breakfast, and Joseph's mother was crying on the other end. The school wanted to move Joseph to a different class, even though there were only 6 weeks left in the school year. She was scared this would make him look like the problem instead of Ms. Bridges, and begged me to keep things quiet while she figured out what to do. I promised her I wouldn't mention Joseph in any of my complaints, but I could hear him in the background asking if he had to go back to that classroom. Wednesday brought a certified letter saying Ms. Bridges was now on paid administrative leave pending investigation. The teachers' union had already filed a grievance claiming the district violated their contract by not giving her proper warning before the suspension. The letter said the union was demanding she be reinstated immediately with back pay for any days missed. Thursday, I got another email from the district suggesting we consider their alternative program for special needs students, since Bennett was clearly struggling in the mainstream environment. I typed my response refusing their suggestion and cited federal law about her right to be in regular classes with proper support. I attached copies of all her previous accommodation plans that Ms. Bridges had ignored. Friday afternoon, Bennett came home from the school crying because kids were saying she got their favorite teacher fired. She locked herself in her room and wouldn't come out for dinner. Saturday morning, I knocked on her door with paper and colored pens and asked if she wanted to write down her side of what happened. We sat on her bed for 3 hours while she drew pictures and wrote sentences about how Ms. Bridges made her feel stupid and scared. She used her own words to describe the aide being taken away and how her stomach hurt every morning before school. Sunday, we made copies of her statement at the office supply store and put them in a folder with all her medical records. Monday of week 5, I got notice of a child study team meeting scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. I spent Tuesday night organizing a huge binder with every piece of paper I had about Bennett's diagnosis and accommodations. I printed emails from her previous teachers saying how well she did with proper support. I found report cards from when she had an age showing all A's and B's. I tabbed every section and made an index so I could find things quickly during the meeting. Wednesday at 2 o'clock, I walked into the conference room at the district office, carrying my binder and Bennett's folder. The union representative was already there with Ms. Bridges' personnel file spread across the table. She started talking before I even sat down about how this was an isolated incident that was being blown out of proportion. We spent the first hour arguing about whether my previous complaints could even be considered, since they weren't formal grievances filed through proper channels. The union rep kept saying Ms. Bridges had 20 years of excellent evaluations, and one bad day shouldn't ruin her career. The second hour was worse because they brought in Ms. Bridges' written statement, claiming Bennett had been defiant all year without any documentation. I pulled out my folder of emails I'd sent about each incident with dates and times, and exactly what happened. The district officials looked uncomfortable, but said they needed to verify everything before making any decisions. Finally, I opened the drawer documents I'd gotten from the substitute teacher, showing Ms. Bridges had a list of accommodations for 8 different students that she'd crossed out with red pen. Next to Bennett's name, she'd written, "Stop babying her" in the the margin. The handwriting was clearly hers because it matched other papers in her personnel file. The district superintendent looked at the papers for a long time before saying they needed experts to verify the handwriting, even though everyone could see it was the same. The meeting ended with them scheduling another meeting for the following week and warning me not to discuss any of this on social media or with other parents. The next morning, Bennett didn't want to go to the school and I couldn't blame her, but she had to go. When I picked her up that afternoon, she was sitting in the nurse's office with red eyes and shaking hands. The nurse told me some kids had been teasing her at lunch about getting their favorite teacher in trouble. They said she was a tattletale and a crybaby who couldn't handle real school. Bennett had started hyperventilating right there in the cafeteria. But then she did something that surprised the nurse. She pulled out the breathing card her therapist gave her and counted to 10 while doing the square breathing technique. She got herself calm without needing to call me. The nurse said she'd never seen a kid her age manage a panic attack like that. It felt like a tiny win in all this mess. When we got to the car, Mr. Davidson was waiting by my door. He asked if we could talk privately for a minute. Bennett went to sit on the bench by the flagpole while he leaned against my car. "Look, I want you to know I'm on your side here," he said quietly. He kept glancing around like someone might be listening. He told me the district was putting pressure on him to make this go away. They didn't want any investigations or lawsuits. His hands were tied by policies that protected teachers with tenure. Even with the video evidence, removing a teacher took months of documentation and hearings. He seemed tired, older than when this all started. Part of me wanted to believe he really did care, but I was too exhausted to trust anyone in administration anymore. 2 days later, I got a call from Joseph's mother while I was at work. She decided to file a federal complaint for disability discrimination. Joseph had a medical condition that required frequent bathroom access, and the school knew about it. She had all his medical documentation and the 504 plan that specifically stated he needed immediate bathroom access. She wanted to coordinate our cases without duplicating efforts. We spent an hour on the phone comparing notes and documents. She had emails from the beginning of the year where she'd reminded Mrs. Bridges about Joseph's needs. I had the video from the classroom and all my complaint forms. We decided to reference each other's cases in our filings to show a pattern of behavior. Her lawyer said multiple incidents would strengthen both cases. By week 6, the rumors were everywhere. Parents were talking at pickup about Mrs. Bridges possibly being moved to 3rd grade next year. Some parents were angry about it. They said she was strict, but kids learned in her class. One mom told me her daughter loved Ms. Bridges because she kept the class quiet so kids could focus. Another dad said we were making a big deal out of nothing, that kids needed to learn to follow rules. The divide was clear between parents of typical kids and those of us with kids who struggled. I kept my mouth shut and just listened to what people were saying. That weekend, I went through old school board meeting minutes online, looking for anything useful. What's making the lunch aide suddenly say things about special privileges while staring at Bennett? That timing seems really specific, like someone told her to do that right after the suspension started. Makes me wonder who's organizing these little jabs at a kid. 3 pages deep into a document from 3 years ago, I found it. A memo from the principal to all staff about bathroom policies. It stated clearly that students must never be denied bathroom access and that accidents should be handled with dignity and privacy. It specifically mentioned that denying bathroom access could be considered neglect. The principal's signature was at the bottom. This directly contradicted what Mrs. Bridges had claimed about following school policy. I printed 5 copies and highlighted the relevant sections. The compliance officer finally called me back after weeks of leaving messages. She acknowledged there were gaps in how accommodations were being implemented at the school. She said the district was proposing mandatory training for all teachers on working with special needs students. But the training wouldn't start until next school year, almost 8 months away. She kept using words like moving forward and future improvements, but nothing about fixing what was happening right now. When I asked about consequences for Ms. Bridges, she said personnel matters were confidential. She suggested we focus on positive solutions rather than punishment. The next week, Bennett's therapist wrote a detailed clinical letter for our case. She documented how Bennett's anxiety disorder had gotten significantly worse since the school year started. She included specific examples of how the classroom environment under Ms. Bridges had triggered panic attacks and regression in coping skills. The letter stated that Bennett now associated school with trauma and was showing signs of school refusal. She recommended immediate changes to Bennett's educational environment to prevent further psychological harm. The therapist had been seeing Bennett for 2 years, so her documentation carried weight. She agreed to testify if needed. Friday of week 7 brought a thick envelope from the teachers' union lawyer. The letter used words like potential defamation and damaging a professional educator's reputation. It warned against making any public statements about Ms. Bridges or discussing the matter on social media. It mentioned that Ms. Bridges was considering her own legal options for harassment and emotional distress. My wife read it 3 times, then threw it in the drawer. We decided not to respond at all. Our lawyer said it was just intimidation tactics. We kept our mouths shut and didn't post anything online even though I wanted to scream about it. Monday morning, my boss called me into his office. He closed the door and sat down with that look managers get when they're trying to be understanding but really aren't. He said I'd missed 12 days in the past 2 months for school meetings and emergencies. The company was supportive of family needs, but this was affecting my projects. I negotiated working evenings and weekends to make up the hours. I'd log on after Bennett went to bed and work until 2 in the morning, then get up at 6 to get her ready for school. My wife took over morning drop-off so I could get to work earlier. The stress was crushing both of us, but we had to keep our jobs and health insurance. At home, we started new routines to help Bennett sleep better. We moved her bedtime earlier and added lavender oil to her bath. We practiced the breathing exercises together every night. On Sunday nights, we do practice tests at home to make Monday tests less scary. She started keeping a feelings journal where she could write or draw what she was worried about. Slowly, her anxiety started improving just a little bit. She still had bad days, but the panic attacks were happening less often. The therapist said these small improvements showed that Bennett could heal with the right support. But I knew healing wasn't enough if the system didn't change too. I typed up a formal request to the district, asking them to save all the camera footage from that day and any other days with incidents. The district's legal team sent back this super careful letter 2 days later, saying they'd keep the recordings safe. Week 9 came, and I went to the school board meeting where they let parents talk during public comment time. Joseph's mother stood up at the microphone and talked about how kids need basic dignity and access to bathrooms without saying any names, but everyone knew what she meant. She was shaking, but kept going for the full 3 minutes they gave her. I felt proud sitting there watching her be so brave. After the meeting, a teacher I didn't know came up to me in the parking lot and said quietly that Ms. Bridges had problems at her last school too with similar stuff, but she couldn't prove it, so I just filed that info away in my head. The next Monday, the school put up this new new bathroom sign-out sheet where kids had to write their name and the exact time every single time they went. I complained to Davidson that this would make kids with medical problems feel bad, but he said it was just temporary while they figured things out. Week 10 arrived and the district started calling parents to ask if their kids could be interviewed about what happened in Mrs. Bridges' class. We all had to sign papers saying yes, and they promised the kids wouldn't get in trouble for telling the truth. The lawyer helping Joseph's family made sure there were rules about no payback against kids who talked. When the investigation report came out, it basically said, yeah, Ms. Bridges broke rules, but maybe she didn't mean to, and they suggested she just get more training instead of getting fired. That made me so mad I stayed up all night writing a federal civil rights complaint about how they weren't following the 504 plan rules for Burnett. I sent it to the Office for Civil Rights, which meant the whole district had to look at how they handle all special education stuff, not just our case. Week 11 came, and suddenly the district wanted to make a deal. They offered to move Missy Bridges to a different school and make all teachers take special training and give better help to the kids who got hurt. But they wanted us to sign papers saying we couldn't talk about it publicly. Joseph's mother had found a lawyer who told us that settlements usually get you more real changes than fighting it out in public where you might lose. I sat down with Burnett that night, and we talked about how sometimes you don't get everything you want, but you take what helps you move forward. She looked at me and said she just wanted to not be scared at the school anymore. That hit me hard because that's all any kid should want. The settlement papers sat on my kitchen table for 3 days while I thought about it. Other parents were calling me asking what I was going to do. Some wanted to fight and make it all public, but others just wanted it over so their kids could move on. I kept thinking about what the lawyer said about real changes versus public battles. Meanwhile, Burnett was still going to the school every day with that substitute teacher who was actually nice to the kids. She'd come home and tell me about her day without that scared look she used to have. But I knew Ms. Bridges would come back eventually if we didn't do something. The district kept calling, trying to get us to decide faster. They even increased the settlement offer a little bit, adding money for extra therapy for the affected kids. Joseph's mom and I met at a coffee shop to talk it through. She brought all her notes from the lawyer showing how these cases usually went. Most of the time, the teacher just gets moved around anyway, and the kids don't get much help. At least this deal would guarantee some real support for our kids. We decided to meet with all the other parents whose kids were in that class. About 15 parents showed up at the library meeting room I reserved. Everyone had different opinions, but most were tired and just wanted their kids to be okay. One dad said his son still wet the bed sometimes after what happened with Joseph that day. Another mom said her daughter was afraid to ask to use the bathroom anywhere now. These were real kids with real trauma, and we needed to do what would help them most. I thought about all those meetings with Davidson where nothing changed, and all those complaints I filed that went nowhere. At least this settlement would force some action, even if it wasn't perfect. The district also promised to check in every month for a year to make sure things were really changing. That seemed better than just hoping they'd do the right thing on their own. Plus, the kids would get extra help right away, not maybe someday after a long fight. I called the district the next morning and said we'd take the deal, but with some changes. We wanted Mrs. Bridges moved to a school with no special needs kids at all, and we wanted the training to start within 2 weeks, not whenever they felt like it. They agreed pretty fast, which made me think they were worried about the federal complaint I filed. The paperwork took another week to finalize with lawyers going back and forth about every little word. The next Monday, Joseph came back to the school, and his mom walked him right to the classroom door holding his hand tight. She had a folder with papers from the doctor saying he could use the bathroom whenever he needed to without asking. The substitute teacher took the papers and nodded and put a special pass on Joseph's desk that was bright yellow. Joseph kept touching it like he was making sure it was real. During math, he got up 3 times to use the bathroom, and each time the substitute just smiled at him. His mom texted me later that he was still having bad dreams and wouldn't wear certain pants anymore, but at least he was back in class. The 504 meeting for Burnett happened 2 weeks later in the conference room with the ugly green walls. I brought copies of everything, including the doctor's notes about her anxiety and the test scores showing how much better she did with help. The settlement talks happening in secret while kids still go to school every day makes me wonder what the district is really worried about here. Finding that old bathroom policy memo completely contradicting Ms. Bridges seems pretty convenient timing for their sudden willingness to negotiate. The district people sat on one side of the table and kept shuffling papers while the special education coordinator typed on her laptop. They agreed to give Burnett an aide for all tests and let her take sensory breaks when she needed them and move her to a quiet room for testing. The union rep showed up halfway through the meeting and started arguing about the wording, saying it was too broad and could set a precedent they didn't want. We went back and forth for an hour about whether it should say as needed or when requested by student, and finally settled on language that kept Burnett's protections but didn't make the union mad. I pushed hard for something called stay put provisions, which meant they couldn't take away her accommodations while any future arguments were happening. The district lawyer kept checking his phone and finally agreed just to get the meeting over with. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it meant Burnett would have stability no matter what happened next. The next week at pickup, I noticed how other parents looked at me different. Some would smile and give me a thumbs up when the teachers weren't looking, but others would turn away or whisper to each other. One mom came up and said she was glad someone finally stood up to Ms. Bridges, but then another dad told me I was making trouble for everyone. The PTA president stopped inviting me to the monthly coffee meetings. I didn't care anymore because Burnett was actually wanting to go to the school again. The district finally moved Ms. Bridges to the administration building where she was doing filing and data entry with no student contact. The union fought it hard, saying she deserved to stay in a classroom, but the district held firm, saying it was temporary pending arbitration. She had to turn in her classroom keys and clear out her desk while the janitor watched. Someone saw her crying in the parking lot carrying a box of her teaching awards. It wasn't the full removal I wanted, but at least she couldn't hurt any more kids while they figured out what to do with her. A week later, every teacher in the district got an email about bathroom policies and accommodation requirements. It was 3 pages long and basically said kids could use the bathroom when they needed to, and teachers had to follow all accommodation plans exactly. The principal had to read it out loud at the staff meeting and answer questions. Some teachers rolled their eyes, but others seemed relieved to have clear rules finally. It should have existed years ago, but at least it was something. Burnett took her first test with her aide sitting next to her the following Thursday. The aide didn't give her answers, but helped her stay calm when she started breathing fast. Burnett used the fidget cube the counselor gave her and took 2 sensory breaks where she walked around the hallway. She got a 73%, which wasn't perfect, but was way better than the zeros she used to get. When I picked her up, she was actually smiling about a test grade. Her anxiety was still there and probably always would be, but now she had tools to handle it. Joseph's mom and I met for coffee coffee at the place near the school on a Saturday morning, when no one from the school would see us. We sat in the back corner and talked quietly about how things were going. She said Joseph was seeing a therapist twice a week and was getting better slowly. I told her about the federal complaint and the union issues. We both knew some people thought we were troublemakers, but we didn't care anymore. Our kids were safe, and that was what mattered. We kept it short because we knew people would talk if they saw us together too much. The federal office sent a letter 2 weeks later saying they got our complaint and would investigate. The letter was full of legal words, but basically said it could take 18 months before they decided anything. They assigned a case number and said someone would contact us for interviews. The district would have to turn over all their emails and documents about Ms. Bridges and the accommodation denials. It was going to be a long process, but at least it was moving forward. The union rep called me 2 days later and said Ms. Bridges filed a grievance about her suspension. She was claiming she was punished for maintaining classroom discipline and that we were making up stories about her. The rep said the arbitration would take months to schedule, but Ms. Bridges would be back in the classroom next week with full pay. I hung up and just sat there staring at my phone. The system was protecting her again. I picked up Annette from the school that afternoon, and she was quiet in the car. When we got home, she finally told me she was proud she stood up for Joseph, even though everything after was really hard. She said watching him cry in his own pee made her so mad she couldn't stay quiet anymore. I hugged her and told her doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. She nodded and went to do her homework. The substitute teacher who'd been covering for Ms. Bridges called me that night. She said the district offered her a permanent position at another school starting next month. She was taking it, but wanted me to know she was glad she could help when it mattered. She said finding those papers in the drawer changed everything, and she hoped things would get better for Bennett. 3 months passed since that Friday call from the principal. Our daily life found a new rhythm with Bennett going to the school, with less worry on her face each morning. The new teacher they brought in was actually following her IEP and letting her have her aid during tests. Bonette's grades went up, and she stopped throwing up before school. We still checked in with the principal every week to make sure nothing was slipping through the cracks again. The district sent out a letter announcing they were forming a new oversight committee for special education compliance. They invited parents to apply to be on it, and specifically mentioned they wanted input from families who'd filed complaints. Joseph's mother called me that afternoon and said we should both apply. We filled out the forms together at her kitchen table, while the kids played video games in the living room. We knew it would be another long, slow process, but at least we'd have a voice this time. The committee meetings would start in 2 months and run through the whole school year. Ms. Bridges' arbitration hearing got scheduled for next month according to the union website. Whatever happened there, we'd already gotten Bennett the protection she needed to actually succeed in the school. Her aide was with her every day now, and the new teacher never once made fun of her anxiety. The other kids stopped calling her names because the teacher shut that down immediately whenever it started. Bennett could actually focus on learning instead of just surviving each day. I'd learned through all this that fighting for your child meant accepting partial victories and permanent watching. The system wouldn't fix itself, but consistent pressure could create small, meaningful changes. Every email I sent, every meeting I attended, every complaint I filed pushed things forward just a little bit. Other parents started reaching out to me for advice when they had problems with their kids' accommodations. I gave them copies of all my complaint letters and told them which offices to contact. We weren't done fighting, but we were in a better place than we were that Friday. Bennett had her accommodations working properly, and Joseph had his dignity back after his mom got him transferred to a different class. The kids who witnessed what happened that day learned that adults could be wrong and that speaking up mattered. Maybe future kids wouldn't suffer the same way because we'd made enough noise that the district had to pay attention. The investigation was still going on, and the arbitration was coming up, and the committee work would take forever, but at least things were moving in the right direction now. Thanks for letting me dive into all these fascinating details with you today. It's always so interesting exploring this stuff together. Until next time, friends, and hey, like the video, it helps more than you think.